Okay, good evening. It is time to get it back into Star Wars. I've been slacking on starting a new book, and so tonight I'm going to start reading the Old Republic Annihilation. We'll start with the prologue in chapter one and see where we are at that point. So this is a full-length novel. There's 33 chapters, so it's going to take a while to get through. Um, so settle in and we'll get started. So, prologue. The air inside the cave was cool, but a thin sheen of perspiration coated Satil Shan's skin. The hard, uneven stone dug into her back and shoulders through the blanket she lay on. She shifted and twisted to escape the discomfort, the dim light of glow sticks casting the shadow of her writhing limbs into a grotesque dance on the far wall. Try to remain still, Satil. Master Nagani Zhou, the mentor who had brought her to the sanctuary of this cave, spoke softly, but his deep voice still resonated in the close confines of their hidden refuge. Outside, the galaxy was engulfed by war. The Sith, ancient enemies of the Jedi Order, long thought extinct, had returned to threaten the existence of the Republic that had stood for thousands of standard years. Satil Shan had seen the horrors of this war firsthand, battling with her fellow Jedi alongside the soldiers of the Republic against the enemy hordes. She had seen worlds burn. She had seen friends die. She had suffered more than she ever imagined she could and survived, yet the pain she experienced now was something entirely different. There is no emotion, there is peace. The mantra of the Jedi helped her focus, and she closed her eyes as she tried to draw on the Force to calm herself. But her body refused to obey her mind, and instead of a slow pattern of inhale, exhale, her breath continued to come in ragged, rapid gasps. The masters at the Jedi Academy had never prepared her for this. How could they? Satil, can you hear me? Are you okay? Her eyes snapped open in response to Nagani Zhou's voice. Gritting her teeth while another wave of agony washed over her, she could only nod in reply, her fingers clenching his hand as she tried to draw the strength to sustain herself through this ordeal. We're almost done, Satil. Just one more push. The final contraction felt like it was ripping her apart, but she followed her master's instructions and pushed despite the pain. Satil screamed, and then suddenly the pain was gone. An instant later, the loud cries of a child, her child, filled the cave. It's a boy, Satil, Master Zhou said as he cut the umbilical. You have a son. Satil had known the child she carried was male for months. She had felt him through the Force as his life grew stronger within her. But hearing the words spoken aloud somehow made this all feel more real. She had brought life into a galaxy overwhelmed with death. Here, Satil, Master Zhou whispered, holding the infant out to her. Exhausted, she struggled to find enough strength to reach out with her weary arms. Nagani had wrapped the babe in a swaddling blanket. Warm and enveloped as he had been in the womb, he was no longer crying. Pulling the child close to her chest, she couldn't help but wonder what destiny the Force had chosen for her son. She had no doubt his path would be a difficult one, for in these dark times no path was easy. What role would he play in the fate of the galaxy? She knew her own role well enough. Satil Shan, hero of the Republic, paragon of the Jedi Order, strong in the Force. She was a champion of the light, a symbol, an icon. The rank and file saw her as the embodiment of everything that the Jedi and the Republic stood for, and that was why she had been forced to hide her pregnancy. For the first months it had been simple. The loose-fitting Jedi robes had easily covered the swelling of her belly, but in the later months a more elaborate ruse was necessary. She couldn't have done it without Master Zhou's help. When her condition became impossible to conceal, and she had been forced to go into hiding, he had told the Jedi Council and the leaders of the and the leaders of the Republic military that he had sent Satil on a vital mission, something he could not speak of for fear of endangering her life. Given Master Zhou's impeccable reputation, none had questioned him. Now, however, the mission was over. It was time for her to return. The Republic had fought too long without their champion. The Sith Empire's relentless advance had gone too far. She could no longer ignore the Republic's need. "Are you sure about this, Satele? You don't want to reconsider?" Satele looked down at the baby resting so peacefully in her arms and realized she would treasure this moment for the rest of her life. Whenever she was scared or alone or consumed by grief, she would draw on the memory of the first time she held her son. In the early stages of her pregnancy, she'd struggled against her maternal feelings as she'd felt the life growing inside her. She had tried to rationalize her protective instincts as nothing more than a biological imperative, an evolutionary mechanism to ensure the propagation of the species. But as the weeks and months passed, she realized her love for her unborn child was more than just biology and hormones. The emotional bond was real, and her desire to do anything, take any risk, or commit any act to protect her son was almost overwhelming. She would do everything in her power to protect him, even terrible, violent things. She would put his needs above all others, even if it meant an entire planet must suffer to spare him pain. Given her position and power, this was unacceptable. "You promised you would take him," Satele said softly, gazing down into the child's wide, wondering eyes. "I will," Nagani assured her, "if that's still what you want." "What I want has nothing to do with it," she muttered, as she reluctantly handed the child back to her master. "For the sake of the galaxy, this is what must be." As he took the child from her arms, the moment of greatest joy she would ever know ended. The child began to whimper, so Nagani stood up and began to cross quickly back and forth across the cave's uneven floor. The movement seemed to settle the child, much to Satele's relief. "And you're sure you don't want to tell the father?" her master asked as he paced. "No, he's a good man, but there is darkness in him." Nagani nodded, accepting her decision. "What's his name?" he asked. Satele was momentarily taken aback. He had never asked her the father's name before, and she had never offered it. Then she realized he was talking about the baby. "You are going to raise him," she said with a shake of her head. "You should choose his name." The Jedi Master stopped pacing and fixed her with a glare she remembered from her days as a Padawan. "You're his mother. His name should come from you." Satele turned her head to the side and closed her eyes as exhaustion washed over her. "Theron," she murmured. "His name is Theron." That's the end of the prologue. Hey, Nambro! You finally managed to stay up past 8:30. Yeah, and I finally managed to get off my butt and start reading Star Wars again. Been putting it off for a while, and now I'm committed to a novel, so this will be good. Get back into it. Good to have you. Always glad to see you come in. Let's see. Can I manage to do a shout out? Maybe. Possibly. Let me give it a try, because I suck at it. Team Never Tilt. Let's see. Let me see here. I'll figure it out. I got to get used to doing this. Oop, underscore. Let's see if this worked. Hey! You would think it would be fairly easy, but for some reason that skill eludes me. Okay, jumping on into chapter 1. Theron Shan walked quickly through the packed streets of Narshada's promenade. His unassuming features, pale skin, brown hair, brown eyes, average build, allowed him to blend easily into the crowd. The cybernetic implants visible around his left eye and right ear were his most distinguishing features, but he wasn't the only one sporting them on Narshada, and they typically didn't draw unwanted attention. The Hut-controlled moon was a landscape of unfettered urban sprawl, marked by towering sky towers, crammed too close together, and gaudy, glowing billboards that dominated the horizon as far as the eye could see in every direction. Sometimes called Little Coruscant, it was hard to accept Narshada as a true homage to the Republic capital world. In Theron's eyes, it was more akin to a grotesque parody. Coruscant had been designed with an eye to aesthetics. There was a pleasing flow to the cityscape and a consistent and complementary style to the architecture. The city was carefully divided into various districts, making it easy to navigate. The pedestrian walks were crowded but clean. The endless stream of air speeders overhead stayed within the designated traffic lanes. On Coruscant there was an unmistakable sense of order and purpose. At times Theron found it positively stifling. Here on the smuggler's moon, however, it was a glorious free-for-all. Run-down residential buildings were scattered haphazardly among seedy-looking commercial structures. Factories abutted restaurants and clubs, with no regard for the toxic clouds of filth spilling out over the patrons. With no traffic rules in force, airspeeders and swoop bikes darted and dived in seemingly random directions, sometimes flying so low the pedestrians ducked and covered their heads. As Theron turned a corner, he realized someone was following him. He hadn't actually seen anyone on his tail, but he could sense it. He could feel eyes watching him, scoping him out, measuring him as a target. Master Nagani Zhou, the Jedi. Oh, we skip. Ugh. I kind of don't like it when they switch gears so quickly. Master Nagani Zhou, the Jedi who'd raised him, would probably have claimed Theron's awareness came through the Force, but despite coming from a long line of famous Jedi, Theron wasn't one of the Order. In fact, he had no special connection to the Force at all. What he did have was a decade's worth of experience working for Republic Strategic Information Service. He'd been trained to notice minute details, to be hyper aware of his surroundings at all times. And even though his conscious mind was distracted by the details of his coming mission, his subconscious one had instinctively picked up on something that had triggered alarms in his head. He knew better than to ignore them. Careful not to break stride, turn his head, or do anything else that might tip off his pursuer, Theron used his peripheral vision to scan the area. At street level, everything was a chaotic mishmash of bright, flashing colors, a constant assault from an army of pink, purple, green, and blue signs and billboards provided perfect camouflage for whoever might be following him. Fortunately, the intensity of the inescapable neon was muted by the layer of grime that clung to every surface, a reminder of the unchecked pollution in the atmosphere that would eventually transform Narshada into an uninhabitable wasteland. It wasn't easy to pick someone who looked suspicious out from the crowd. The population of the smuggler's moon was as varied, unpredictable, and seedy as the surroundings. In the years since the signing of the Treaty of Coruscant, the Hutts had remained staunchly neutral in the ongoing Cold War between the Republic and the Sith Empire, making Narshada a common gathering place for criminal elements from all corners of the galaxy. Black Sun slavers, Rhodian pickpockets, Twi'lek hustlers, Chevan stim dealers, any and all illicit activities were tolerated on Narshada, provided the Hutts got their cut. Still, there were those too greedy or stupid to cut the Hutts in on their action. When that happened, there were consequences. Things got messy. Is that what this is about? Theron wondered. Is Morbo on to me? Did he send someone to take me out? He passed by the statue of Karaga the Unyielding that dominated the promenade. Though he'd been to Narshada many times, he couldn't help but pause for a second and shake his head in disbelief. A 30-meter tall hut made of solid gold was too ostentatious to ignore. Shaking his head also gave him a chance to quickly glance from side to side to catch a glimpse of someone darting into a doorway off to his left. He didn't get a good look at whoever it was, but the sudden movement was unnatural enough to stand out. Someone working alone, could be a mugger or a trained assassin. Theron was on a tight schedule. It was time to force the action. He turned down a narrow side street, leaving the worst of the crowds and the relative safety they provided behind. Off the main thoroughfare there were fewer neon lights and more shadowy corners. If his tail was going to try something, this was the perfect place to make a move. A slight buzzing of the cybernetic implant in his right ear alerted him to an incoming transmission. There was only one person who knew his private frequency. Theron had to take the call. "Accept incoming," he whispered. Louder, he said, "Director?" Theron, the head of the Strategic Information Service, as he so often did, sounded annoyed. "Where are you?" "I'm on vacation," Theron replied. "I put in for some R&R, remember?" Theron realized the director's call could work to his advantage. Whoever was following him would think he was distracted, vulnerable. All he had to do was pretend to be oblivious while listening for his stalker to creep up close, then suddenly turn the tables. "Vacation, huh?" the director grumbled in his ear as Theron continued farther into the deserted alley. "That's funny, because I have a report that one of our field agents has been spotted snooping around on Narshada. Are you keeping tabs on me?" "What are you doing on Narshada?" the director demanded. "Maybe I just like the climate. Smog clouds and acid rain? Not likely. You're up to something." "Well, right now I'm about to be ambushed in a dark alley," Theron thought. Out loud he said, "I'm taking care of some personal business." "What's Tethys mixed up in now?" the director asked with a sigh. Even though he couldn't see the man on the other end of the call, Theron could picture his boss rubbing his temples in exasperation. "Tethys not a bad kid," Theron insisted. "She just tends to fall in with the wrong crowd." "Guess that explains how she ended up working with you," the director grumbled. Theron had stopped walking and was standing with one hand up to the cyberlink in his ear, staring straight ahead. "Might as well be wearing a sign that says, 'Come and get me. Time to make your move, whoever you are.'" "Nagani Zhou saw something special in her," Theron said to the director. "I know Master Zhou raised you, but by the time he met Tethys, he was troubled." "You almost said crazy, didn't you?" She was She has key underworld contacts," Theron explained, "and she knows how to handle herself in a tough spot. We might need a favor from her someday. I'm just looking out for a potential asset." "What makes you think she'd ever help us? Didn't Tethys say she'd kill you if she ever saw you again?" "Then I'll make sure she doesn't see me." "I hate to do this, Theron," the director said with another sigh, "but I'm ordering you to pull out of Narshada. It's for your own good." Theron felt the unmistakable shape of a vibroblade's tip pressing up against his back, and a deep voice growled, "Move and you're dead," in his other ear. "You worry too much," Theron told the director, keeping his voice light. "Everything's under control." In a whisper he added, "Disconnect," and the comlink in his ear shut down. "Get your hands up," the unseen assailant snarled. Theron slowly raised his arms in the air, silently cursing himself for letting his assailant get so close. Never even heard him coming. Was I really that sloppy, or is he that good? "Lose the piece." The words were in basic, but the voice was definitely not human. Too deep, too rumbling. The speaker was large, but without turning around, there was no way for Theron to pin down what species he was dealing with. The comlink in his ear buzzed again, but this time Theron ignored the director's call. He clicked his teeth together twice, temporarily shutting the cybernetics off, so he could focus on getting out of the alley alive. "I said lose the piece." The order was accentuated by a jabbing of the blade against Theron's back. Reaching down slowly, Theron slid his blaster pistol from the holster on his hip and let it drop to the ground. He briefly considered making a move. There was a dozen ways he could try to surprise and disarm his opponent, but without knowing exactly who or what he was facing, it was too risky. Patience. Analyze the situation. Wait for your chance. Those are some fancy wrist guards you got. Maybe you have a poison dart or a pinpoint blaster built in, right? Lose 'em. Any hope Theron had of catching his assailant by surprise with the weapons in his customized bracers vanished as he unclipped the metal bands from his forearms and let them fall at his feet. The fact that his assailant had marked the bracers as potential weapons also meant this wasn't some run-of-the-mill mugger. An Imperial operative would have probably recognized the bracers, but it didn't make sense for any of them to be targeting Theron on a Hutt-controlled world, especially now that Imperial intelligence had been officially disbanded. That left only one other likely and unsettling option: a bounty hunter or assassin working for Morbo the Hutt. Now turn around, real slow. The pressure of the blade eased as the ambusher took a step back. Theron turned to see a violet-skinned Hook towering over him. His heavy-set torso and thick, muscular limbs seemed to fill the entire width of the narrow alley. His frog-like features were set in a grim scowl, his eyes fixed intently on his victim. He was pretty sure the Hook didn't have any backup. He would have noticed if there was more than one person following him, but even if he was acting alone, Theron was no match for the massive brute's raw muscle. Under normal conditions, he could make up what he lacked in strength with speed, but in the tight confines of the narrow alley, avoiding the deadly vibroblade might be difficult, especially if the Hook was trained in close-quarters fighting. Given his choice of weapon, Theron had to assume he was facing a capable and deadly opponent. "What's your interest in Morbo?" the Hook demanded. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Theron said. His earlier hypothesis about his ambusher working for the Hutt seemingly confirmed. "I've seen you scoping out Morbo's place for the past 3 days," the Hook snarled. "Lie to me again, and I won't ask nicely next time," he added, waving the vibroblade back and forth for emphasis. Blah. The threat didn't bother Theron nearly as much as the realization that he'd been made during his recon trips to Morbo's club. "Never saw you at Morbo's," Theron admitted. "Didn't think anybody saw me either." "I've been trained to know what to look for," the Hook answered. Trained? Theron wondered. By whom? Imperial intelligence? As if echoing his own thoughts, the Hook asked, "What?" Oh, I accidentally went 2 pages. "Who are you working for?" Theron wasn't about to reveal his connection to the SIS, and he suspected another evasive answer would be met with violence. "Take the shot!" Theron shouted, as if calling out to an unseen accomplice. The Hook's head turned just a fraction as he reacted to Theron's bluff. Seizing on the distraction, Theron lashed out with a quick kick to the Hook's midsection. The impact caused no real damage, but it momentarily knocked the big alien off balance, giving Theron more room to operate. He was already backpedaling in anticipation of the counterattack. Even so, he barely avoided the expected lunge of his opponent. As he feared, the Hook wasn't just some clumsy brawler. He was quicker than he seemed. As the Hook moved in, Theron tried to disarm him with a wrist lock, reaching out for the hand that held the blade. The Hook countered by twisting his body and throwing his opposite shoulder into Theron, sending him stumbling back. Unable to set his feet, Theron was forced on the defensive. The alley was too narrow to dodge from side to side, so his only option was full-scale retreat. Backpedaling rapidly as the Hook charged forward, the blade slicing and stabbing the empty air centimeters from Theron's chest. Theron suddenly stopped short and dropped to the ground, rolling into the thick legs of his advancing foe. The move caught the Hook by surprise. He tripped over Theron and tumbled to the ground. The fall knocking the vibroblade from his grasp. One of the Hook's knobby knees caught Theron in the chin as he fell over him, splitting his lip and making him see stars. Woozy, Theron ignored the pain and leapt to his feet, and with his first step he staggered sideways into the side of the alley before crashing back to the ground. A massive hand closed around his ankle as the still-prone Hook tried to drag Theron close enough to finish him off. Theron lashed out with his free leg, smashing his foot twice into the Hook's corpulent face. The vice-like grip slipped just enough for Theron to free himself with a twisting roll, and he scrambled on hands and knees toward where his blaster and bracers lay on the ground. The Hook struggled back to his feet, but by the time he was upright, Theron had seized one of the bracers, slapped it onto his right forearm, and taken aim. Toxicity 7, he muttered, squeezing his hand into a tight fist. A small dart launched from a thin barrel built into the bracer and buried itself in the Hook's chest. The mighty alien went rigid as a powerful electrical charge surged through him. He convulsed for several seconds, and then dropped to the ground, twitching slightly from the after effects. Theron considered what to do with the immobilized but still conscious Hook as he quickly gathered his gear. It wouldn't take long for the effects of the electrical blast to wear off, but for the next few minutes the Hook was basically helpless. Theron wasn't about to execute a helpless opponent, but he wasn't above interrogating him. Toxicity 2, he whispered, firing another dart into the Hook's thigh from point-blank range. He waited 30 seconds for the mind-clouding drug to take effect before he started asking questions. "How did you spot me?" he asked. "You said you were trained. By whom?" The Hook shook his head groggily, struggling to resist the chemicals coursing through his system. In a few minutes they would render him unconscious. Theron needed to get answers before that happened. "Hey!" Theron snapped, slapping the Hook's meaty cheek. "Who trained you?" "Republic SIS," the Hook mumbled. "Republic SIS?" Theron repeated, his mind struggling to accept what he'd just heard. "Covert surveillance," the groggy Hook confirmed, his tongue loosened by Theron's truth serum. "Watching Morbo, part of Operation Transom." SIS has eyes on Morbo? No wonder the director knew I was here. Theron had never heard of Transom, but that wasn't unusual. SIS had ongoing missions all across the galaxy, and only the director and the agents involved would be aware of the details. Just my luck to stumble into an active SIS mission. "What are you going to do with me?" the Hook asked, slurring his words and struggling to keep his eyes open as sleep slowly dragged him down. "Relax, big guy," Theron said. "We're on the same side." The director had ordered Theron off Narshada. Obviously, he was worried about him interfering with Transom, whatever it might be. But Tethys' life was at stake, and Theron wasn't about to abandon her, even if it meant defying a direct order. The Hook began to snore loudly, ending any hope Theron had of asking him for more details about Operation Transom. It has to be in the early stages, Theron reasoned. They're still just observing the target. If I get in and out quickly, it shouldn't have any significant impact on the mission. He knew the director would never buy that argument as justification for what he was about to do, but it was always easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Grabbing hold of the Hook's arms, he dragged the sleeping alien into a corner of the alley, hiding him behind several trash bins. He'd wake up in a couple of hours with a pounding headache, but otherwise unharmed. Plenty of time for Theron to meet with Morbo and bargain for Tethys' life. He set off down the alley at a brisk trot, trying not to think about the fact that he was putting his entire career in jeopardy. And that is the end of Chapter 1. And I think that's good for tonight. I'm going to stop there and see who is around. Well, Vesper's on. And right now it says he's only got one viewer, so we should go over to his. So I will take us on over there, and I'll see you there in a minute. If I can figure out what the heck I'm doing here. All right.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not much luck I've had, but more so is Intoxicated into love.